So in a previous video, I talked about using the Roland GM-70 guitar to MIDI converter with a guitar in an alternate tuning, and also talked about how you assign some of the MIDI continuous controllers. In this video, we're going to look at using the Roland GM-70 in MIDI mono mode, which is really exciting because MIDI mono mode's kind of been forgotten about for, I don't know, like 20 years until we have MPE, MIDI Polyphonic Expressions. And MIDI Polyphonic Expressions, it's sort of an extension of MIDI mono mode where when you have a controller, you are able to treat each key or each string, in this case with the guitar, as its own individual MIDI source. So if you think about poly mode, which is what we used before, poly mode's kind of like a keyboard, right? You've got a set of keys, and then you have a master pitch bend control, master modulation control, and whenever you move the pitch bend or the modulation, it's going to affect all the keys equally at the same time. With MIDI mono mode, we can treat each individual MIDI event, each key strike or each string on the guitar as having its own individual MIDI channel with its own individual MIDI controllers. So how do we get this GM-70 to work in MIDI mono mode? We initialized the unit in the last video into poly mode, but that just erased the unit's memory, reset the unit's memory, and set every patch in poly mode. So let's go over here to General Edit. When I do that, we see this is Program 1. We're going to step through our functions, and this is where it gets interesting. See, we have this A flashing, that's under branch. Well, inside of the GM-70, there are actually every single patch can have 4 independent branches, and a branch is a complete set of what you might think of constitutes like a controller setup for a guitar. MIDI channel, bender assignments, program number. Plus, you can, on each branch, either have it working in MIDI mono mode or poly mode. Now, you can see this is in poly mode. Let's change it to MIDI mono mode. So I'm going to toggle over here to where we see poly flashing, hit up. Now we're in mono mode. The channel assignment that we see here says 1. Now this means that the high E string on the guitar is going to be on MIDI channel 1. The next string down will be on MIDI channel 2. The next string down, which is going to be the G string, is going to be on MIDI channel 3. So it starts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we can actually see that the way that these strings are assigned by going up one more time with our functions. And let's go, we're on branch A, B, C, D. And this display shows that the channels that we currently have in use are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then these channels are off. So let's just test that. Let's go back here to branch A, and we're going to go over here. We're going to change our bass channel. And now let's go up to that display. And now we can see that channel 1 is off, and we're starting with channel 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then channel 8 is off. So the GM-70 is surprisingly a very hip unit. Let's go back here, and we're going to go back to channel 1. Go over here and set up channel 1. So that's all that we need to do with the GM-70. With this change now, each string on the guitar is going to have its own MIDI channel. So we're looking at the MIDI monitor inside of Digital Performer, and we can see how each string on the guitar has its own MIDI channel, with the high string being MIDI channel 1 and the low string being MIDI channel 6. Now let's look and see, we'll record, I'll play and record a little bit so we can actually see what's being recorded, what's being sent in that MIDI stream. So let's get started recording, and I'm going to throw in some pitch bends as well. Okay, so let's look at our low E string, and we can see these are the notes that I played, and then this is the pitch bend information that's been sent by the GM-70. I didn't do any bends here. We can see there's still a little bit of, as the note decays, there's a very slight amount of pitch bend information being sent there. Let's look at the B string. Here we can see where I played the note, and then this is where I started to bend the note. So we can see that each string is sending its own information with its own pitch bend information, as opposed to when we were in poly mode and we just had one sort of global pitch bend wheel for the entire instrument. Now, by the way, in case you're wondering where the sound is coming from, I am using a soft synth that's provided with Digital Performer, and it's called, I think, Proton. Here it is. Let's go have a look at Proton. Right, so here in this case we're using Proton to actually generate the sound from the MIDI notes. Now let's switch over to Arturia's Pigments, which is a really, really great soft synth, which has built-in support for MIDI Polyphonic Expressions. And again, MIDI Polyphonic Expressions is just kind of like an updated version of good old MIDI mono mode. So this is Pigments, and currently Pigments is running in MPE mode, MIDI Polyphonic Expression. I've got the guitar tuned to DAD-GAD. So there's my E string, which is tuned down to a D. So when we have MIDI Polyphonic Expressions, each string has like its own version of this separate synthesizer running on it with its own independent pitch bend controller, which is really what we're looking at here. If you're using MIDI Polyphonic Expressions with a keyboard controller like a Raleigh, you can actually put in independent controls for where your finger is on the keyboard controller. But in this case, specifically for guitar synthesizer players, we want to be able to have a different amount of pitch bend for each string. So again, if I play my two lowest strings, I can do that bend on the B string and not have it affect what's sustaining on the lower strings. Now, if we turn polyphonic expressions off, and polyphonic expressions are turned on with just this little button down here. If we double click on it, we can see this is our MIDI polyphonic expression configuration. We can set the bend range here. I am going to turn this off. We can turn it off by using the disable button or just clicking here. And we'll notice that when I play my two strings, the two lower strings, and then do a bend, everything's going to get that bend. And what we're getting is we're getting conflicting MIDI information because some strings are sending very little pitch bend information. The string I'm bending is sending a lot of pitch bend information, and the Pigments is trying to sort everything out. So if we turn MPE back on, enable MPE, I'll close the window, then we have really the control we're looking for. And this is really great because this is certainly what you could do with the Roland GR-700, but after people sort of gave up on MIDI mono mode, you weren't able to do these same sort of things. And the Pigments is a super powerful software synthesizer, and in addition to having support for the MIDI Polyphonic Expressions, I really like the way you get such great visual feedback on what you're doing. I plugged a Roland EV5 into the back of the GM-70, and by default that sends MIDI aftertouch, and we can see over here we've got a little box that's going to show us. I'm going to move the pedal on the GM-70. And we can see as I move the pedal, the aftertouch information that's being sent, and I can also see that it's modulating the filter. If I double click on this aftertouch button, we can see the aftertouch has been assigned to both filter and resonance. So I assigned the filter knob on the in the GM-70 to control controller 74. So let's hear that. And then we have resonance. And of course we can add in modulation with the touchpad. And I assigned the switch over here to do an octave change for us. So I hope this gives you an idea of some of the cool stuff you can do using some really vintage gear like the Roland GM-70, which supports MIDI mono mode, with some really modern stuff like Arturia Pigments, which supports MIDI Polyphonic Expressions, but which is kind of really just an updated version of good old MIDI mono mode.